Ladies and gentlemen, the 2021 Emilia Romagna Grand Prix is on us, and today on this podcast, we dive down deep into the race and try to find out the major aspects that you would want to know more about, try to discuss that, try to dissect it, and know what our takes are on that, including that crazy accident between George Russell and Valtteri Bottas. We shall find out who's at fault, but that is to come. Let's get down deep into it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome along to the Inside Line F1 podcast and Pits To Podium. My name is Soumil, Arora, joined by Kunal, Shah, the ex-marketing head of Force India and now the motorsport consultant at Sport Network. And Kunal, I had a friend of mine who just recently came into Formula One. This was his first ever live race that he watched. And what a way for a new fan to begin. I think the best way to put it is, if you bring a new fan in and you show them this race, they will become a big-time fan. And that person, thankfully, has. Crazy race here.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Soumil. But I have to ask, this friend of yours, did he or she become a fan of Formula One due to Drive to Survive? Would you know that?
He did. I mean, it helps. It helps. I mean, it's certainly a factor that's bringing in more numbers to Formula One, so that's a plus.
It is. I'm not ashamed of Drive to Survive one bit, because it's bringing more numbers to Formula One. It's bringing more numbers to our show and to our channel, and that's great for us. That's great for our partners as well. That's also great for our newsletter. We've started a new newsletter service. It's free, it's insightful, it's visually engaging. So we're going to leave a description. We're going to leave a link in the description for those who are eager to sign up. But Soumil, back to your friend. I think we couldn't have asked for a better race to sort of have your friend enjoy Formula One, because the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, and I'll stay away from saying the full name of the race, right? It was a classic motor race, traditional circuit, changing weather conditions, two of the best drivers going head to head right from the start. Red flag, we had that. We didn't sort of anticipate that would happen, but we had the rookies crashing into the barriers. We had several penalties. We had the perfect ingredients of an unpredictable Formula One race, and I think it was brilliant.
It was superb, right? The rain was in there as well, and that's always a plus. We as Formula One fans are always dying to see rain in. It just helps out, right? It helps out so much to put in such a good race. But there's so much to talk about, so many big incidents. Let's start with the first bit, Kunal, that is rating the race. And for me personally, it's a sure shot 9 out of 10, just for the sheer drama, just for the sheer storylines. Okay, at certain times it did slightly tail off, only slightly, but what more could you ask for? Even with the red flag break as well, we got some proper drama at the end, courtesy of a stellar Lewis Hamilton comeback. More on that later. But what's your take on that? Oh, also, let's revive something that we used to do last season. Your Pits to Podium moment, Kunal.
My Pits to Podium moment. Well, I think it would be Lando Norris. He of course got voted as the driver of the day, but it would have been something had he stuck it on pole. He missed out pole by a couple of inches. Being off track limits yesterday, but he drove a phenomenal race. In at Imola to get to where he did. He scored his first podium of the season already. In both the races, he scored a top 4 finish, which is fantastic for him, fantastic for McLaren. And to go back to your question about my rating for the race, I would probably give it a 10 on 10, Soumil, so it's not too far off from where you rated it. And I must also, give a disclaimer that my ratings usually are, 3 on 10 or 10 on 10. I pretty much am between the extremes, I would say.
And I don't blame you. Sometimes Formula One can just be at a 3 on 10. Paul Ricard will looking at you, but this one was just superb, right? A lovely, lovely way to bring it in. And what was so lovely about it, Kunal, was the battle that we saw between Verstappen and Hamilton, right? So I gave this a little bit of thought. I asked myself, what is this like, this battle that we are seeing? And I know I'm putting a lot of wrestling analogies into my videos these days, but that's just because I'm watching a lot of it. But what it really feels like a good wrestling storyline, right? You see something, they tease it, Then he sees another big fight where they're not completely done yet. They're showing you what could be the case, just enough to leave some flames in your stomach and make you feel like, yeah, I'd actually pay to watch more of it, you know. That is what is happening. And unlike wrestling, this one isn't scripted. It's all real. It's all happening the way it is. It makes you want to buy in to the next pay-per-view that's in wrestling, but it makes you want to tune in to the next Formula One race, and it's making me do the same. I'm just compelled to watch on, as I'm sure you are as well, dear listener. It's just building up so well, and isn't that what we like about live sport?
Absolutely, it is amazing, and it's also hopefully triggering you guys to tune into the Inside Line F1 podcast and Pits to Podium to hear what Soumil and I have to say about the race. But taking forward your analogy of wrestling, when we talk of Verstappen versus Hamilton, I loved how they wrestled, at turn one on the opening lap. Verstappen, brilliant getaway. He started in second gear. He himself was surprised at the kind of, acceleration that he, got. I think it was a fair move into turn one, typical aggressive. He had his elbows out. Lewis, of course, had to ride over the curbs, right? And at the end of it all, I think it was just perfect. It's just how we want to see the best drivers battle it out on track. And a few thoughts about the race also, Soumil, while we are talking about the two drivers, was after qualifying, the whole conversation was Lewis versus the Red Bull drivers. Because Valtteri was down in P8. It was the whole talk of race strategy, how Red Bull could attack Lewis with two drivers on two different strategies and so on, right? But the rain changed that narrative. The rain gave us two of the best wet weather drivers in competitive machinery going head to head for track position. And for me, that's always a better narrative for Formula One than, race strategy. Because, tire strategy, of course, you can do a lot of things like giving you track position, but nothing like seeing them wrestle it out on track.
Greatness sells itself. And it did today. They were just superb at the start. And Lewis Hamilton, of course, getting some slight skirmishes with the anti-cut curbs right there at Imola. And they are really brutal. I saw a lot of that in some of the sim racing broadcasts that I did earlier today as well. Both races at Imola, by the way. And some of those cars also really grinding it out there. Hamilton learned it the hard way around in the real world. But Hamilton also made a mistake. Now, greatness sometimes does fall into making some mistakes here and there. And at wet weather tracks, it's so easy to do that. I remember Hockenheim in 19 or 20? I think their 125th anniversary race. I think that was 2019 when we had the crowds in. And Hamilton made that error at the drag strip right at the very end, had some front wing damage. Same this time at Tosa, very similar error. But the error aside, Kunal, and I know it's a big thing to say error aside, because had he not made that error, who knows where he would have been. But even then, just coming back to my friend, his main focus was not that, oh, Lewis made an error. He came back to me at the end of the race and said, Hamilton is amazing. What a comeback this guy's had. And that's just the way, if a new Formula One can look at it that way, I think all of us, oldies perhaps, can just take a look at Lewis with another limelight, right? Because that was some comeback drive right there. And that's just Lewis being Lewis at the end of the day.
I think, I will split the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix into two halves, because it literally was a race of two halves thanks to the Bottas and Russell crash. And in the first half of the race, it was Max Verstappen who was the star of the race. We spoke about the start. He built up a comfortable lead. He stuck, he sort of made use of the lead when it came to the first round of pit stops. And he did everything right to, be the leader of the race. And it was in the first half of the race where Lewis Hamilton had the rare error, like you said, everyone makes an error. And I love the way how Lewis embraced his error. He said, hey, I usually don't make one, but this was a big one, and just goes to show how much we are pushing all the time and the very fact that I'm human, right? So that's to do with the first part of the race. The second part of the race for me, Soumil, was when Hamilton actually shone, right? And, he was P8? He was a lap down. Of course, the red flag neutralized his position of being a lap down. It allowed Mercedes to repair the damage on his car, which, they, by the way, claim that it cost him 2 tenths in aero performance per lap, right? So, in the second half of the race, it's without a doubt that Lewis Hamilton was classic. He carved his way through the field and he came up to P2, which we wouldn't have thought was possible, when we saw him in the barriers. In fact, think about Mercedes as a team on the lap that, I think it was lap 31 or something when this happened, on when Lewis was in the barriers a few minutes later, or a few corners later or something. It was Valtteri who had crashed out as well. So Mercedes had both the cars out of the race technically till Lewis reversed and rejoined the race. But for them to still leave this weekend as leaders of the championships is absolutely another surprise.
I'm exactly having the same sort of feeling, Kunal. How have they done that? That's just Mercedes for you, right? Bottas' incident, we shall come to this immediately afterwards. It's a big one, we can't ignore it. But that's just how Lewis Hamilton is. That's just how superb he was. But to touch up briefly, Kunal, it's one thing that's been on my mind quite a lot, and I know it's not the top topic to speak about, but it's still something really big that we should be speaking about. Last year, Monza, we saw a similar sort of situation. Mercedes is not being in the best of positions, and we saw both Hamilton and Bottas stuck in the midfield. And I know we did this debrief on the Inside Line podcast and Pits to Podium, where we discussed the reason why Mercedes were not so good is because their car wasn't designed to be in the midfield. Their car was designed to be best in the fresh air, not so much in terms of dirty air when you've got cars that you are chasing. But again, this time out things were different because the second half of the race was still relatively dry in comparison. And what was bizarre was that Bottas could not make his way through the midfield, but Hamilton carved his way past easily. And that's been something that's been doing the rounds on Twitter. Why is that? Why is it just a stark contrast in terms of driving ability? I don't think Bottas is that bad. Must be something else, wasn't it?
I wouldn't rate it as driving ability, Soumil, but what the first two races of 2021 has shown is that the Mercedes has a very narrow operating range. And this is something Lewis Hamilton has been saying after qualifying yesterday on pole position, right? And it just seems that Lewis is able to operate within this narrow range far more comfortably than the likes of Valtteri Bottas. And Bottas has been complaining of rear instability, throughout. And this is despite topping the free practice sessions on Friday and so on. So I just think it's about how Bottas is still finding his feet in the car, while Lewis already has sort of done that. And maybe that's just down to adaptability in their driving styles. And we've seen it's Lewis Hamilton. He's able to adapt himself to whatever car Mercedes is able to build him. We've seen the likes of him drive. We've seen him drive the likes of the Diva in the past and so on, right? So
Yep.
it's just the operating range from what I've been reading.
And it's amazing. When Valtteri Bottas came into the team, Lewis Hamilton was a three-time world champion. Now Lewis is a seven-time world champion. I mean, the man is an absolute beast. But that's this battle for the lead done. And we'll be speaking about this for a long time. Don't you worry, ladies and gentlemen. This one is going right down to the wire. But the crash, Kunal. It's been confusing. So I saw the replays. I saw the onboards. When I think of it, and I could very well be wrong. Again, I'm not the one who has the racing experience there. Kunal has to weigh that opinion in a little bit more. But what was really perplexing is that, firstly, a Williams was actually getting a move done on a Mercedes. Superb stuff, by the way, in 2021. It's not, I don't know. Williams wasn't back in the day when Mercedes was, so it's not 2010, by the way. That's what I wanted to say. But Russell got there to the outside line, right? There was a definite case where you knew that they are going to go side by side. That's for sure. He got the draft in, he got the run on. That was definitely going to be the case. But where things really got stuck on was that marginal steering movement. Now, that's the same thing that George Russell said. Bottas said he didn't do anything. But looking at the onboard of Russell, it seemed like there was a marginal movement. And when you're doing 300 kilometers per hour, that marginal movement is enough, right, to make up your judgment. So, who do you think is at fault right here? I don't know. I don't quite have the experience with this stuff, so I can't be calling it right down the wire. But what's your take on this one, Kunal? Who was at fault in this particular incident?
Frankly, I'm glad it's got it's been called out as a racing incident because that's how I see it. At first, people thought that Bottas unfairly pushed George Russell closer to the edge of to the edge of the width of the track and so on, right? But multiple onboards, multiple angles actually show that yes, Bottas made a movement as any driver would, while they're defending, and it was a marginal movement as George Russell, himself confirmed. So, despite having done that, Bottas, of course, left ample width, as we've also seen in all the screen grabs that are doing the rounds of social media, right? So, technically, Bottas was clean. He made a move to defend. He left ample width. The question here is, did he make the move a little too late for comfort? That's probably the question to ask. But again, the FIA have looked at it, and I would go with the judgment that I think it was okay. And it was just Russell who had his, who had a loss of grip because his right tires were not probably, they were either on the white line or, just off it. And that's what just caused the shunt, and it was a massive shunt. It, of course, brought out the red flag. It threw out a lot of shit on Kimi's face, in his own words, right? But in the end, Tamburello has had history in Formula One, and I'm glad that this was just another shunt that both drivers walked away safely from.
Bad memories. Let's not bring them up right here. But you know what kind of a dangerous track Imola can be. But on the lighter side, second year in a row where Kimi Raikkonen has seen George Russell have an accident, and he said, "Free positions. Okay, I'll take it." But that's Kimi Raikkonen for you. Lovely, lovely stuff for him as well. But let's get to it, Kunal. I think this is one topic that we've really wanted to discuss, and I'm glad because coming back to my friend, he also made this observation that Lando Norris is a beast because he is. That was a good race from him.
Gentle giant, if we may call him that, right? But since I spoke about the two halves of the race, Soumil, there was one driver that shone in both halves of the race, and that to me was Lando Norris. Okay, I think he was fantastic in the start. There were three cars going abreast, making all the overtakes on the Alpha Tauri and Carlos Sainz and the likes. And in the second half, he was of course holding up the Ferraris. He was on the soft tires because he had no other tires to sort of go on. The mediums were actually used up for him, right? But I think he also benefited very well to ask McLaren for those team orders. Very rare to see Daniel Ricciardo actually make way for another driver, right? True. But yes, Lando Norris, he's now, I think he's third in the Drivers' Championship, and I think that is phenomenal. Two top four finishes like we spoke about, and pretty good for McLaren as well, with the whole recovery that they're aiming with the Mercedes engine and the likes. And, McLaren are also able to make the stride on single lap pace as we saw in qualifying as well. So all in all, a brilliant weekend for Lando Norris.
It was 27 points is his championship tally, and that's not 27 points in 3 or 4 races as you would expect a midfield team to accumulate. That is in 2 races. That is mind-blowing. That's just the way Lando Norris has been so far this season. Very, very good. And now I'm compelled to say that this could have been very, very good, Kunal, because yesterday there was a real sense of excitement about Sergio Perez, and I genuinely felt that, right, he trumped Max Verstappen in qualifying at a circuit like Imola. Well, it's a proper driver's track. It largely comes down to how daring you actually are, and Sergio Perez won that battle, but just a case of what could have been today. And so many things that could have gone wrong didn't go wrong eventually. Your thoughts on Checo?
Well, a little disappointing. He went from hero to zero in no time, literally. But let's not forget his qualifying efforts, I would say, because he said in his post-race qualifying debrief that, if there's a track you don't want to come to in only your second race for the team, it's Imola. And he actually sort of did that. And he was actually pretty sure that had he not made his mistake on the last corner, he would have got pole from Lewis Hamilton. So that would have been an even bigger statement to make, right? But come Sunday, I think I'll add a filter to the conversation. Of course, this is not what Checo said, but you don't want to come to Imola in the wet for your second race for a new team. I guess that's probably what happened. He lost positions at the start itself. And then he, of course, on the opening few laps, he lost position to Charles Leclerc as well. So he sort of just went backwards, and then the whole mistake under the safety car again. I think just too eager that he probably wanted to get those positions back, and then he was running up to P4 till he had that spin. So all in all, great learnings, but yes, unfortunate for him that he was, half a second outside of the top 10. He finished 11th. But, after all the heroics yesterday, I'm sure he wouldn't have appreciated much finishing outside of the podium places.
Indeed, yeah. There's a silver lining, of course, those qualifying heroics, but there's no taking away from the fact that Checo Perez is an amazing driver. Just those impulse movements that happens when you're in the middle of a race. He had that error and he thought, yeah, I don't think I should have lost that, But again, when you're in a Formula One car, I think that happens. But again, you can also have a counterpoint and say Checo Perez has been in the sport for what? 10, 11 years now? He should be doing better. The bottom line is, stuff happens. He knows it. We know it. He's going to come back stronger. That's the main thing. But home race for Ferrari, Kunal, and Ferrari were good today. And I can't believe I'm saying this after the debacle of last year. But P4 and 5, that brings a smile on our face. And Nityan will be having a gala time. And even Clayton, two of our team members at Pits To Podium who are geniuses with social media. And they also support Ferrari. And yeah, they've had a tough time. Let's put it that way.
If you were to listen to Sebastian Vettel, he says everyone's a Ferrari fan,
Yes.
even if you say you're not a Ferrari fan. But the great thing about Ferrari is that they have these spirited performances from Charles Leclerc, and this time we even saw that with Carlos Sainz Jr., which is fantastic. And the second thing, and this is maybe a little more personal, is that for once people are activating them finishing fourth and fifth. So they're not finishing first and second, or any higher than the top five positions. But very rarely do you see people cheer a fourth and fifth place finish for Ferrari. But that's just how it's been. Like you said, 2020 was a debacle for them. They've regrouped. They've again had a restructure, which seemingly seems to be working. But Charles Leclerc, fantastic driving yet again. Carlos Sainz very narrowly missed out on Q3 yesterday, but he went from P11 to P5, and I think that was a brilliant recovery drive. And in the post-race interviews on Via Sport, Carlos actually said that they actually were carrying more downforce, and that's probably why they couldn't hold back Lewis much longer than they would have thought they could have. So great to see them fourth and fifth in their home race, and they are 34 points, fourth in the Constructors' Championship, just 7 points behind McLaren. Who would have thought that would have happened?
Exactly. It's good. It's good to see Ferrari in a situation like this one. And I'm glad. We all love Ferrari deep down, as you mentioned with that Sebastian Vettel quote. But we get to speak to Sebastian Vettel next. Speak about Sebastian Vettel next. I'm sorry. That I know if you're a Vettel fan, that's a bad transition. When you're speaking about the glory days of Ferrari, about Sebastian Vettel and what makes all of us love Ferrari, then all of a sudden, all the bad stuff with Vettel and Ferrari flashes back to your mind. I know. Can be a bit sad to see at times, but just was the sad stuff continuing on for him today, Kunal. What can we say? Because of course, it's hard to.
I have no words, okay, for Sebastian Vettel, because, on one hand, there's a driver who's trying to resurrect his form, his name, his credentials in the sport.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, he had a race like he did today, which, if you make a list of all the things he went through, you're like, oh my God, this is, even worse than the worst bad luck one could expect. So before the race started, overheating issues. That led to the team actually working on his car on the start grid. They needed more time, so all his four tires weren't fitted at the 5 minute mark just before the start of the race, and that led to a 10-second stop go penalty, which eventually converted all of that into a gearbox issue that saw him retire on the penultimate lap of the race, right? And despite all of this, he was barely even in the whole race narrative, Soumil. I think Nikita Mazepin was mentioned more than Sebastian Vettel during the 63 lap race. So there's something that needs to change fundamentally in what's going on in Sebastian Vettel's life in Formula One.
It reminds me a lot of Arsenal fan TV, right? This one, where you have someone so passionate that you love and you want to do so well, and there's all the supporters, so passionate, by the way, but and who love the driver and the team in the Arsenal fan TV case, but just the frustration builds up, and Sebastian will be feeling the same thing because he wants to succeed as well. I don't know what to say. Seriously, you can listen, you can see. By the time I've come to this junction, I'm struggling for words a little bit, but that's because I've grown up watching Sebastian Vettel, right? I don't want to see him in this situation. I don't know. Let's see what happens. Let's sweep it under the carpet and move on to something else, which we should.
Before you actually move on, there was something interesting that Sebastian Vettel said.
Go on.
That he actually, in the second half of the race, or rather the second half, when the restart happened, right? They took on the soft tires, thinking that it's going to be a standing start, when it in fact turned out to be a rolling start. So I was puzzled by it itself. We all assumed that the drivers would, line up and then go onto the start grid for a standing start. So I'm expecting the FIA to issue some sort of clarification, because I think there were a couple of teams that were caught out by this whole decision to make a rolling start, to the second half of the race.
No, you're absolutely right, Kunal, because I remember that being the protocol, wasn't it? It recently changed up, and it was changed to the fact that after a red flag, you will come to a standing start. So, good spot. Why did that happen? Again, FIA has been slightly inconsistent with track limits last time out. This one here, it's a hard job.
Yeah,
But
I wouldn't be a steward. I wouldn't give up this mic to be a Formula One FIA steward. Yeah.
no, it's a hard place to be in. But next up, we've got to speak about a few other things before we finally go off air, folks. A few penalties being awarded, many crashes happening. Just very briefly, Nicholas Latifi had his incident, and this time I don't think Mazepin was at fault because it was a car coming back on in the wet. Latifi could have slightly Mazepin could have slightly backed off, but I think it was more Latifi than Mazepin, Kunal. And then there were so many other penalties as well that we had here this weekend.
Yeah, you mentioned Latifi's crash, Mazepin's involvement. Firstly, congratulations to Nikita Mazepin. He finished the race. I think that's important. No, I say this with good intentions. Here's a driver who's trying to learn, who's spending a lot of his family wealth to be in Formula One. So the least you can do is at least help him be positive or speak positively when he's had a good time, right? So I would say that about Nikita Mazepin. But, talking about, again, Imola drivers circuit, it offering a challenge and the likes, all three rookies met the barriers this weekend. You saw Tsunoda do it in qualifying. Mick Schumacher did that in the race, and of course Nikita Mazepin did it in free practice one and a couple of spins here and there. So in all, it's great that the rookies were offered a bigger challenge when they make the step up from Formula 2 to Formula 1. But back to the Latifi Mazepin incident, I just think Latifi thought he could sort of bully his way, against Mazepin and keep track position, because it was Latifi who made the mistake and he, went off, at the corner before, and then he rejoined and realized, oh my God, Nikita's pretty close. Let me just sort of close the door, and I think he closed the door a little too aggressively, and he saw the barrier. Not something I thought he would have expected, but that was one penalty. The most confusing penalty was Kimi Raikkonen's, and I'm not even going to go into what that penalty was. All we know is he finished P9 and of course was thrown out of the points because of the penalty. And in fact, for Alfa Romeo, Giovinazzi had to make an unscheduled pit stop in the closing stages of the race to sort out a car problem, which is why he lost out on points as well. Otherwise, instead of the two Alpines, you would have probably had the two Alfa Romeos scoring points.
And that would have been some sight, right? At their home race, seeing them do so well would have been something. But hey, good on Alpine. They recently got their upgrades in. They were in a bit of a scrappy spot recently as well. Good to see them doing that. But Kunal, final thoughts before we go off. This was such a good weekend.
It was a brilliant weekend. And final thoughts actually are down to the Constructors' Championship table, which I have open here. Aston Martin are in 5th place in the Constructors' Championship
How?
with 7 points. Okay. In 4th place are Ferrari with 34 points, right? And that is 5 times more points that the team in 4th place has already over the team in 5th place. So it's, 4 teams have done a bulk of the scoring in the first 2 races of the season. And that's, of course, Mercedes and Red Bull, and then McLaren and Ferrari. And I think that's A, great for the way it's shaping up, and B, for as close as we thought the midfield would be. At the moment, it's clearly McLaren and Ferrari who have come out on top of the uber competitive midfield battle.
So, food for thought, literally, before we go off air. That's an interesting one. I wrote an article about understanding how fast AlphaTauri was. Perhaps I was fooled into thinking they were good enough to be in that class of McLaren and Ferrari. This weekend, of course, plagued by issues. Yuki having his accident, Gasly not finding the momentum after the first part. But let's see. I'm intrigued to see where this goes.
I am, and I must tell you, your article was actually well written and well intentioned. At the race in Imola, Pierre Gasly actually made the wrong gamble of tire strategy. He started on the full wets, and that's what cost him track position. And eventually he scored points, but from P5, of course, he would have hoped to go ahead, not fall back. And the other driver that actually even had full wets was Esteban Ocon, and there was at one point he was 17th or something, but the red flag, of course, helped him come up ahead and score points, at Imola. And as I'm sure you guys remember, he also out-qualified Fernando Alonso. So
He did.
Great going for Ocon. And in fact, for Alonso, he scored his first points, upon returning to Formula One. So that's some great positive news as well.
Yep, Sundaram from our team will be jumping with joy after that one. But hey, it's been a lovely race weekend. It's been so many discussion points. Folks, we shall be back with a lot of good stuff also on the Inside Line F1 podcast and Pits to Podium. More midweek race stuff, more good discussions. We've got many topics to speak to you about, and also coming up with the race previews. This is the place to be. Leave a subscribe if you liked what you heard or what you saw. Leave us a like as well. A constructive comment would do a world of good. And if you really liked it, come on, share it with your friends and family members who are interested in Formula One. And also, we've got our Grand Prix Prediction League coming too. For more information on that, you can check out our social media links down below. Subscribe to our newsletter as well. I know by the end of this point, I'm plugging a lot of stuff, but as I said in the last episode, it's just a bunch of all the good stuff that we are doing right here at the Inside Line F1 podcast and Pits to Podium. But folks, real pleasure having you on this ride for this weekend. What a race weekend it was. And thank you so much for joining me as always, Kunal. Lovely to have you on.
Likewise, Soumil, great race, great episode, and I'm sure we're going to be speaking soon for another video on our channels.
Indeed. Bye-bye, folks. See you.
Bye-bye.